So if I were to sneeze right now, and I'm not, thank goodness, if I were to sneeze right now, what would you all say? I heard, I think a God bless you. Did anybody give me a Gesundheit? Okay, a Gesundheit, a God bless you. If you were going to do it in Hebrew, it would be livriut, means to health. So why? I mean, I know that you were taught by your parents to say that if somebody sneezed, but why? Does anybody know? I'm sorry, your heart stops beating. Close, very close, very close. Different question. Where do you think your soul is? Some people think it's in their hearts. I think some people think it's in their brain. Some people think it's like their entirety of their body. Interestingly, the idea is that it's the throat. That our souls, at least according to the rabbis, reside in our throats, right at the base of our throat. And that's why we bless people when they sneeze, because of their souls. If they sneeze hard enough, the idea is that their soul actually leaves their body for a moment. And we're saying, God bless you, to give them some sort of protection until the soul can enter their body again. I mean, it's based on this idea, based on the verse in Genesis that the eternal God formed the first human being from the dust of the earth. God blew into the nostrils of that being the breath of life, and man became a living being. And if you think about it, it kind of makes sense that that's where our soul is, right at the base of our throat. Similarly, we say a blessing each morning when we awaken, thanking God for returning our souls to us. So it's interesting to think that this divine spark is part of us, and it's precariously balanced in our throats. So why speak of the soul? Why speak of the nefesh? Why speak of the fact that it resides here? Because religious views of the soul, and when a person receives the full status of personhood, are being used to shape legislation in this state and in this country. And I want you to know the Jewish view of the soul. And I want you to know a Jewish view of abortion. And I want to be very upfront here. It's going to be a difficult subject because we're speaking about something that's painful. It's painful to consider. There are people in this room and on Zoom who have experienced miscarriages. There are people in this room and on Zoom who have had abortions. There are people in this room and on Zoom who have infertility issues. And it's painful, and I want to acknowledge that in advance. But I think it's very important that all of you know that in Jewish law, abortion is permitted and sometimes required. Let me say that again. Abortion is permitted and sometimes required in Jewish law. This is Repro Shabbat, Reproductive Justice Shabbat, because this week's Torah portion is Parashat Mishpatim. In Mishpatim, there are all sorts of laws, and one of them is this one. When men fight and one of them pushes a pregnant woman and a miscarriage results, but no other damage ensues, the one responsible shall be fined according as the woman's husband may exact from him, the payment to be based on reckoning. So when two men fight, if one of them accidentally bumps into or shoves a pregnant woman and a miscarriage ensues, he's not liable for murder. He's not liable for manslaughter. He is liable for a fine to be paid to the woman's husband. the payment to be based on reckoning. The tragic death of the fetus in this instance requires only monetary damages because a fetus does not have the full status of personhood. In fact, in Jewish law, for the first 40 days of the pregnancy after conception, the fetus is seen as just mere fluid. Potential, but just fluid. And for the rest of the pregnancy, the fetus is seen as part of the pregnant person's body until birth. So that gives rise to the fact that if somebody converts to Judaism who is pregnant, then the baby that's born after their conversion is considered Jewish because they were pregnant at the time of their conversion. The pregnancy is considered part of their body. And if they became fully Jewish, then the baby, the fetus, became fully Jewish. Full status of personhood begins at viable birth, when the head emerges and the first breath is taken. And we're back to, where does our soul reside? We are ensouled not at conception, but at birth, when we take our first breath. All of this becomes important when we are considering all sorts of things. You can see how all of this is balanced in the thinking, both in the Torah and in subsequent Jewish law, because they are trying to determine who takes precedence. They are trying to determine what are the limits. I am imagining that some of those limits were determined by the fact that there were so many pregnancies that didn't make it to full term. I am imagining the idea that a baby that is born as a stillborn, that is not a viable birth, is not given a full burial. That custom is also because far too many children died during the pregnancy. But the full status of personhood begins at viable birth. And when we are considering whose life takes precedence, Jewish law gives precedence for the life of the mother until viable birth. If the fetus is seen as endangering the life of the mother, then abortion is seen as necessary to preserve her life. Now, to what extent preserving her life means is, I think you can imagine, an area of disagreement in Jewish sources. And I imagine that you're not surprised about that at all. But the basis for the decision making is the same. If the life of the mother is endangered, then an abortion is necessary to preserve her life. So what's happening in the state of Nebraska? In the state of Nebraska, we now have a bill, LB 626, that doesn't acknowledge any of the Jewish position, the Jewish theology of when a person receives their soul, when a person gets the full status of personhood. It limits abortion to 6 weeks or to when there can be heard some sort of what's called a heartbeat, but since the heart has not developed yet, it's not a heart, but there's some sort of electrical pulse. It threatens doctors with losing their license to practice if they do not perform the ultrasound before the abortion, and if they perform an abortion after that pulse is heard. It offers some exceptions, but the way that it offers them in some cases is to say that what is an abortion is not an abortion. So it states its exceptions by saying if there would need to be some sort of procedure in the event of an ectopic pregnancy, it defines that as not an abortion. When in fact, the procedure for someone who has an ectopic pregnancy is actually an abortion. So it tries to finesse things to make some exemptions for the life of the mother, but defining it differently doesn't change that they're talking about an abortion. Defining it differently tries to make them feel better and say, hey, we offered exceptions, but they're just redefining things and it's not clear enough to protect the life of the mother. And so we have the possibility of endangering people's lives. We have the reality of imposing theological views from one religion on others. And we have the reality of interfering in decisions that should be made by the person who's carrying the fetus, the doctor that they are consulting, and if they want to speak to their clergy and find out what their faith tradition says, then they can invite that comment, they can invite that help, they can invite that knowledge. But that's not what's happening here. Temple Israel has already been doing work on this and other legislation that's happening in this session of the unicameral. You will get an email next week with all of this information, but I am going to let you know what we have decided to share with our congregants as what you can do to make your voice heard. So, 1, contact your state senators. Call, email, or write your state senator and tell them why access to abortion matters to you. And there will be a link in the email that will allow you to find who they are and their contact information. 2, submit a letter to the Omaha World Herald's Public Pulse. You will be provided a link to write a letter about your position on abortion access, and you can then share it with your neighbors and urge them to reach out to their senators. I don't know how many of you saw the really beautiful and articulate letter that Cantor Alexander had published in the Omaha World Herald this week, but I would invite you to take a look at that. You are invited to attend Planned Parenthood Lobby Day. You can sign up to join other advocates in a day of lobby training, briefings on relevant issues, and visiting our senators at the Capitol. If you plan to attend, you're going to be told to email Wendy Hamilton so that we can communicate with you in advance of and during Lobby Day. My understanding is that Lobby Day is going to be Wednesday, March 8th. Wednesday, March 8th, but we'd like to coordinate our Temple Israel presence. And then finally, share this information with your networks. Share these ways to get connected with your friends and neighbors and spread the word. I learned from a writing of Rabbi Amy Scheinerman this week about this Torah portion. She quoted the Midrash Yalkut Shimoni, which is a relatively recent compilation of Midrashim. And she says that the Midrash Yalkut Shimoni observed that the laws of Mishpatim, the laws of our Torah portion, follow directly after the instruction concerning the altar. And the Midrash says, in time to come when there will no longer be an altar, building a just society will be equivalent to bringing sacrifices. We have the possibility of building a just society, but to do that, we need to exercise our right for advocacy. Excuse me. Thank you. We need to exercise our right for advocacy, and we need to make clear what our thinking is, what the faith tradition of Judaism says about this very important right that may be severely curtailed in the coming weeks.